Get out of the car now, or I will make you regret it. The officer's voice would later echo across a courtroom, played back frame by frame, as the moment everything in his life began to collapse. Because the black woman he was about to brutalize was not who he thought she was, and the call she would make minutes later would reach the most powerful legal office in the state. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The late afternoon sun stretched long golden lines across the quiet suburban streets of Silver Spring, Maryland, where trimmed hedges and identical mailboxes lined the road like a carefully arranged painting. Angela Brooks drove steadily through the neighborhood, her hands relaxed on the steering wheel, the soft hum of jazz filling the interior of her car. It had been a long day, the kind that left a dull weight behind her eyes, but there was comfort in routine, in the familiar turn onto Maplewood Drive, in the knowledge that she was minutes away from home. She carried herself with a quiet precision, every movement controlled, every breath measured, as though even in solitude she refused to let the world rush her. To anyone watching, she was simply another woman heading home, unremarkable, unthreatening, blending seamlessly into the rhythm of suburban life. But there was something in her gaze, something steady and unshaken, that hinted at a deeper discipline, a lifetime of knowing exactly when to speak and when to remain silent. As she approached a four-way stop, her foot eased onto the brake, the car rolling to a smooth halt before continuing forward. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. And yet, 2 blocks behind her, a patrol car turned onto the same street. Officer Daniel Hargrove adjusted his grip on the wheel, his eyes narrowing slightly as he locked onto her vehicle. There was no call, no report, no violation, just a feeling he had learned to trust, or at least convinced himself he should. His jaw tightened as he accelerated just enough to close the distance, the low growl of the engine breaking the stillness of the street. Angela noticed the cruiser in her rearview mirror almost immediately, not because it was obvious, but because she had trained herself to notice everything. The way it lingered just a second too long at the turn. The way it matched her speed with unnatural precision. Her fingers tightened slightly against the wheel before relaxing again. She had been here before. Not this exact moment, not this exact street, but the pattern was familiar, etched into her memory through years of experience. Still, she kept her posture composed, her breathing even, refusing to let anticipation turn into fear. The neighborhood seemed to hold its breath as the cruiser crept closer, its presence now impossible to ignore. A curtain shifted in a nearby window. A man watering his lawn paused mid-motion, the stream of water spilling onto the pavement as his attention drifted toward the slow-moving vehicles. And then, without warning, red and blue lights exploded to life behind her, cutting through the calm like a blade. The reflection danced across Angela's rearview mirror, sharp and demanding, impossible to dismiss. For a brief moment, everything seemed to narrow into silence. Then she exhaled, slow and deliberate, and guided her car toward the curb. Angela's car settled into stillness at the curb, the engine idling softly as the flashing lights painted restless streaks across her windshield. For a brief second, she closed her eyes, not in fear, but in preparation. Then she placed both hands visibly on the steering wheel, fingers spread, posture upright, controlled. The patrol car door opened with deliberate force, the sound sharp against the quiet street. Officer Daniel Hargrove stepped out, his boots striking the pavement with heavy, purposeful steps. His presence carried an air of ownership, as if the street itself belonged to him. His jaw was tight, his shoulders squared, and there was something in the way he moved that suggested he had already made up his mind about what this stop was going to be. He did not approach casually. He advanced with intent. As he reached her window, he did not greet her. He did not introduce himself. He stood there for a moment, staring down at her through the glass, letting the silence stretch just long enough to establish control. Then, with a sharp rap of his knuckles against the window, he motioned for her to lower it. Angela complied smoothly, pressing the button without hesitation. The window slid down, letting in the faint hum of cicadas and the distant sound of a lawn mower. Restarting somewhere down the block. License and registration, Hargrove demanded, his voice flat but edged with something colder, something impatient. Angela turned her head slightly toward him, her expression composed. "Good afternoon, officer. May I ask why I am being pulled over?" The question was calm, measured, entirely reasonable, but landed wrong. Hargrove's lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes narrowing as if her tone itself was a challenge. "I asked for your license and registration," he repeated, slower this time, each word clipped. Angela gave a small nod. Of course. Her movements were deliberate as she reached for her purse, careful not to make any sudden gestures. She retrieved her wallet, then the registration from the glove compartment, handing them over with steady hands. Hargrove took them without a word, his fingers brushing hers briefly, his grip firmer than necessary. He stepped back slightly, glancing over the documents, though it was clear he was not really reading them. His gaze kept flicking back to her, scanning her face, her posture, her calmness. That calmness irritated him. It was not what he expected. Most people shifted, stumbled over their words, tried too hard to appear cooperative. She did none of that. She simply sat there, watching him with quiet attentiveness. The man watering his lawn across the street had now fully stopped, the hose hanging loosely at his side. A curtain on the second floor of a nearby house pulled back just a little more. The air carried a tension that had nothing to do with the weather. Hargrove returned to the window, handing the documents back with a flick of his wrist that sent them sliding slightly across the edge of the door. "Step out of the vehicle," he said abruptly. Angela's fingers paused as she gathered her papers. "Officer, I would like to understand the reason for this stop." Her voice remained even, but there was a firmness now, a quiet line being drawn. Hargrove leaned in slightly, his presence pressing into her space. "You are being detained for suspicious behavior." The words hung there, vague and hollow. Angela's brow furrowed just a fraction. Suspicious of what, exactly? That was it, the final thread. Hargrove's expression hardened, his patience snapping into something sharper. His hand moved to the edge of the door. "I'm not going to repeat myself," he said, his tone rising just enough to carry across the street. "Step out. Now." The command was no longer procedural. It was personal. The word "now" lingered in the air like a trigger waiting to be pulled. Angela did not move immediately. Instead, she turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting Hargrove's with a steady, unwavering focus that seemed to unsettle him more than any protest could have. "Officer," she said, her tone controlled, almost instructional, "I am complying, but I need you to remain professional." The statement was simple, but it carried weight. It was not defiance. It was not fear. It was a boundary. Hargrove's nostrils flared, his jaw tightening, as if her composure itself was an insult. "You do not tell me how to do my job," he snapped, his voice rising, drawing more attention from the surrounding houses. The man across the street shifted his stance, pretending to adjust the nozzle on his hose, though his eyes never left the scene. A car slowed as it passed, the driver glancing over, then quickly looking away. Angela exhaled slowly, then reached for the door handle. "I am stepping out," she said clearly, narrating her movements with precision. She opened the door and stepped onto the pavement, her posture straight, her hands visible at her sides. The late sunlight caught the side of her face, illuminating the calm in her expression, the kind of calm that did not come from ignorance, but from experience. Hargrove moved closer the moment her feet touched the ground, closing the distance between them with deliberate pressure. He circled slightly, positioning himself at an angle that forced her to turn toward him, his presence invasive, calculated. "Turn around," he ordered. Angela remained still for a brief second. "Am I under arrest?" she asked, her voice even. The question landed like a spark on dry ground. Hargrove stepped in closer, his shadow falling across her. "You are being detained," he said sharply. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be." Angela nodded once, slow and deliberate, then turned as instructed. Her hands remained visible, her movements controlled, each action signaling compliance. But there was no submission in her posture. That distinction gnawed at him. Hargrove reached for her wrist, his grip firm, unnecessarily tight, as if trying to force a reaction out of her. "You think you're smarter than me?" he muttered under his breath, low enough that only she could hear. Angela did not respond. Her silence was not empty. It was intentional. That silence pushed him further. He tightened his grip, pulling her arms slightly behind her back, testing, probing, escalating without justification. "Answer me," he demanded louder now. Angela turned her head, just enough for her voice to carry, still composed. "I am cooperating, officer." The simplicity of her words, the refusal to engage on his terms, only sharpened the tension. Hargrove's fingers dug in harder, his movements becoming less controlled, more aggressive. "Does not look like it," he shot back, his tone thick with accusation. Around them, the street had gone unnaturally quiet. The lawnmower had stopped again. The curtain in the window was now fully drawn back. A phone appeared in someone's hand across the street, held low but unmistakably recording. Angela stood in the center of it all, steady, unshaken, while Hargrove's frustration continued to build, searching for a reason, any reason, to justify what he was already preparing to do next. Hargrove's frustration had been building like pressure in a sealed container, and now it finally cracked. Without warning, he yanked Angela's arms higher behind her back, forcing her shoulders upward in a sharp, uncomfortable angle meant to break composure. "You think you can just stand there and play calm with me?" he snapped, his voice louder now, carrying across the street with a rough edge that drew even more eyes to the scene. Angela's body shifted slightly with the force, but her footing remained steady. She adjusted her balance with quiet precision, refusing to stumble, refusing to give him the reaction he was hunting for. "I am not resisting," she said clearly, each word spaced and deliberate, meant to be heard not just by him, but by anyone watching. That only made it worse. Hargrove stepped in closer, crowding her space until there was no distance left between authority and control. "You are obstructing," he barked, though nothing in her posture suggested it. His free hand gestured sharply toward the patrol car. "Start walking." Angela turned her head slightly, her voice still even. "On what grounds?" The question, calm and direct, landed like a challenge in his ears. His face tightened, a flicker of something volatile crossing his expression. "Do not question me," he fired back. "You do not get to question me." He shoved her forward, not hard enough to knock her down, but enough to force movement. Her shoes scraped lightly against the pavement as she took a step, then another, regaining her rhythm almost immediately. The control in her movement stood in stark contrast to the aggression in his. A car door slammed somewhere nearby. Someone else had stepped out to watch. A phone was now clearly raised, no longer hidden. The lens pointed directly at them. Hargrove noticed it, and for a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes, not hesitation, but irritation at being observed. It made his actions sharper, more exaggerated, as if he needed to prove something. "Keep moving," he ordered, his grip tightening again as he guided, or rather forced, her toward the front of the patrol car. Angela complied, each step measured, her breathing steady despite the increasing pressure. "Officer," she said, her voice cutting through the noise with controlled clarity, "this is unnecessary." He let out a harsh exhale through his nose, almost a scoff. "What is unnecessary is your attitude," he shot back. "People like you always think you can talk your way out of everything." The words hung heavy, carrying more than just authority. They carried assumption, bias, something deeper that needed no explanation. Angela did not respond to that. She did not rise to it. Her silence returned, firm and unyielding, and somehow that silence felt louder than any argument. They reached the front of the cruiser. Hargrove turned her sharply, pressing her against the warm metal of the hood. The heat from the engine radiated through the surface, a stark contrast to the cool control she maintained. "Hands flat," he ordered. Angela placed her palms down without hesitation, her posture aligned, her movements precise. Still compliant. Still composed. That composure was the last thing he could not stand. His grip shifted again, rougher now, his patience completely gone, his need to dominate overtaking any pretense of procedure. Around them, the neighborhood watched in growing silence, the moment stretching tighter, heavier, as Hargrove crossed the line from authority into something far more dangerous, something that no longer needed justification, only an excuse. The line had already been crossed, but now Hargrove stepped fully beyond it. His hand pressed harder against Angela's upper back, forcing her weight down onto the hood with unnecessary force, the metal vibrating slightly under the impact. "Stay still," he snapped, though. She had not moved at all. Angela's cheek hovered just above the surface, her palms flat, fingers spread exactly as instructed. Her breathing remained controlled, measured, as if she were deliberately separating herself from the chaos unfolding around her. "I am still," she replied, her voice steady despite the pressure bearing down on her. That answer, calm and undeniable, seemed to ignite something sharper in him. "Do not talk back," Hargrove barked, his tone rising again, louder than it needed to be. His grip tightened, his fingers digging into her shoulder as if trying to force compliance that was already there. Around them, the tension snapped into something visible. The man across the street took a hesitant step forward, then stopped, uncertainty written across his face. Another neighbor stood frozen on a porch, phone lifted higher now, no longer pretending not to record. The quiet neighborhood had turned into an unwilling audience. Hargrove shifted his stance, then suddenly jerked Angela's arm upward again, higher this time, forcing her torso to twist slightly. "You think this is a game?" he demanded, his voice thick with frustration. The motion was abrupt, aggressive, meant to provoke a reaction. Angela's body absorbed it, her muscles tightening for a brief moment before settling again. "You are hurting me," she stated, not as a plea, but as a fact, her tone level, clear enough for the nearby phones to capture. For a split second, something flickered across Hargrove's face, not concern, but calculation. Then it vanished, replaced by something colder. "Then maybe you should have cooperated from the start," he shot back, twisting her arm slightly further before releasing it just enough to reposition. The contradiction of his words hung in the air, obvious to anyone watching. She had done nothing but cooperate. That did not matter. He stepped back half a pace, then forward again, his movements restless, erratic, as if he needed escalation to justify his own actions. "Turn your head," he ordered abruptly. Angela did not comply immediately. "For what purpose?" she asked, her voice still controlled, still composed. That was the moment everything snapped. "I said turn your head," Hargrove shouted, his voice cracking through the street. Before she could respond, his hand came up and shoved her shoulder sharply, forcing her sideways off balance. Her hands slipped from the hood, her body turning with the momentum as she stumbled one step. To the side. The movement was sudden, jarring, breaking the controlled rhythm she had maintained. A sharp gasp rippled through the onlookers. Angela regained her footing almost instantly, her posture realigning, her eyes lifting back toward him, steady even now. That steadiness infuriated him. "You are resisting," he declared, though the claim rang hollow even as he said it. He closed the distance again, faster this time, his movements no longer measured. His hand struck against her upper arm, not enough to injure, but enough to assert force, to dominate, to escalate beyond any reasonable boundary. The sound echoed louder than it should have in the tense silence. Phones captured everything. The man with the hose lowered it completely now, water pooling at his feet, forgotten. Angela did not raise her voice. She did not lash out. She simply stood there, absorbing the moment with a composure that no longer looked like compliance, but like something far more dangerous, something patient. And in that stillness, as Hargrove's actions spiraled further out of control, it became clear to anyone watching that this was no longer a traffic stop. It was something else entirely, something that would not end quietly. The street seemed to hold its breath after the strike, the tension no longer rising, but settling into something heavier, more dangerous. Hargrove took a step back, his chest rising and falling with controlled aggression, as if he had finally reached the point he had been pushing toward all along. His hand dropped to his belt, fingers brushing against the cold steel of his handcuffs, the faint clink of metal carrying clearly in the silence. "That is it," he said, his voice lower now, but far more decisive. "You're under arrest." The words landed with finality, not because they were justified, but because he had chosen them. Angela stood still, her posture composed despite everything that had just unfolded. Her eyes did not waver. She watched him with the same steady focus, as if measuring not just his actions, but the consequences already forming behind them. "On what charge?" she asked, her voice calm, almost quiet compared to the weight of the moment. Hargrove gave a slight shake of his head, a dismissive motion. "Resisting. Obstruction. Whatever fits," he replied, the arrogance in his tone no longer hidden. "Turn around." Angela did not move immediately. The pause was subtle, but it was enough to shift the atmosphere again, like the moment before a storm breaks. The phones across the street remained raised, capturing every second, every word. The man with the hose had completely forgotten it now, water continuing to spill unchecked across the pavement. Angela's voice came again, softer this time, but sharper. "Officer Hargrove, you need to think very carefully about what you're doing next." He froze for just a fraction of a second, caught off guard not by the words, but by the way she said his name. His eyes narrowed. "How do you know my name?" he demanded, suspicion creeping into his voice. Angela tilted her head slightly, her expression unchanged. "Because I pay attention," she replied. Then, after a brief pause, she added, "and because this will not stay on this street." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. They carried something heavier than volume, something deliberate. A warning, clear and unmistakable, wrapped in restraint. Hargrove stared at her, searching her face for something, anything that would justify taking a step back. But all he saw was calm, controlled, certain. It irritated him more than anything else had so far. A slow, humorless grin spread across his face, his head tilting slightly as if he had just heard something ridiculous. "Oh, I'm sure it will not," he said, a faint scoff escaping him. "You think I have not heard that before? Everyone suddenly knows somebody when things do not go their way." He stepped closer again, closing the distance he had briefly lost, his confidence swelling back into place. "Here is the reality," he continued, his voice firm, almost lecturing. "Out here, right now, I'm the one in charge. Not you. Not whoever you think you can call." Angela held his gaze, unblinking. "I am giving you a chance," she said quietly. "The last one. That should have been the moment. The moment to pause, to reconsider, to step back from the edge he had been walking toward." Instead, Hargrove let out a short, dismissive laugh, shaking his head as if amused by the idea. "You are not in a position to give me anything," he replied, his tone hardening again. His hand reached for her wrist once more, firmer this time, more final. "Turn around," he repeated, and just like that, he made his choice, not realizing he had just closed the last door that could have saved him. Hargrove's fingers locked around Angela's wrist, pulling it back with final intent, his other hand already reaching for the cuffs. "Turn around," he repeated, his voice edged with authority that, for the first time, sounded less certain than before. Angela did not resist the motion. She allowed herself to turn slowly, deliberately, until she was facing him again. That alone made him pause. It was not defiance. It was something else. Something controlled. Something intentional. Their eyes met, and for the first time since the stop began, the balance shifted. Angela did not look like a woman being arrested. She looked like someone who had been waiting. Her breathing was steady, her posture aligned. And then, without breaking eye contact, she spoke. "You should not have touched me." The words were quiet, but they carried a weight that landed differently now. Hargrove's grip loosened slightly, not by choice but by instinct. "What?" he muttered, the words slipping out before he could stop it. Angela's hand moved slowly, carefully, toward her pocket. Hargrove's body tensed, but he did not stop her. Not this time. Not immediately. Something in his mind hesitated just for a fraction of a second too long. She pulled out her phone, the screen already lit, as if the call had been waiting. She lifted it to her ear, her gaze never leaving his. "Dad," she said, her voice calm, clear, cutting through the silence like a blade. "It is Angela. I need you to listen carefully." The name hit him before the words fully settled. Hargrove's expression shifted, confusion flickering first, then something sharper. He watched her, his breathing slowing, his stance no longer aggressive, but uncertain. "I've just been assaulted during a traffic stop," she continued, her tone precise, each word measured. "Officer Daniel Hargrove, badge number 4172, Silver Spring jurisdiction." The phone remained at her ear, but her eyes stayed locked on his, holding him there, forcing him to hear every word as if they were being spoken directly into him. "Yes," she added after a brief pause, listening, multiple witnesses, several recordings. Hargrove's throat tightened. The air around him felt different now, thinner, harder to breathe. Who are you calling?" he asked, his voice no longer sharp, but strained, almost fragile. Angela did not answer him immediately. She listened, nodding once, then spoke again, softer now, but somehow even heavier. "I am at Maplewood Drive. I will remain here." She lowered the phone slightly, not ending the call, just enough to speak directly to him. "You should stand down," she said. There was no threat in her tone, no raised voice, just certainty. Hargrove stared at her, his mind racing, trying to piece together what had just happened, what he had missed. Your dad?" he said slowly, the words catching in his throat. "Who exactly is your dad?" Angela held his gaze for one long, unbroken moment. Then she answered, "Attorney General William Brooks." The name did not land all at once. It sank in, piece by piece, until it hit with full force. Hargrove's face drained, the color pulling back as if something inside him had just dropped. His grip fell away completely now, his hands hovering uselessly at his sides. The street around them felt suddenly too quiet, too still. The phones were still recording, the witnesses still watching. But everything had changed. The authority he had worn so easily moments ago now felt like something borrowed, something fragile. "No," he muttered under his breath, the word barely audible, more to himself than anyone else. Angela said nothing further. She did not need to. The damage had already been done. And for the first time since the lights had flashed behind her car, it was not her who was being evaluated. It was him. The word barely left Hargrove's lips before the distant wail of approaching sirens cut through the stillness of the neighborhood. Low at first, then rapidly growing louder. His head snapped toward the end of the street, his eyes narrowing as two black SUVs turned the corner with deliberate speed, their presence unmistakable, their movement controlled and purposeful. They did not belong to local patrol. They did not hesitate. They arrived. Hargrove's chest tightened as the vehicles came to a precise stop, doors opening in unison. Men in dark suits stepped out, their posture rigid, their expressions unreadable, each movement efficient, practiced. One of them, older, composed, with a presence that carried quiet authority, walked directly toward Angela without even glancing at Hargrove. "Ms. Brooks," he said, his tone respectful, steady. Angela lowered her phone slightly. "I am here," she replied, her voice unchanged, as if this had always been the expected outcome. The man nodded once, then turned his attention finally to Hargrove. The shift was immediate, like a spotlight snapping into place. "Officer Daniel Hargrove," he stated, not a question, but a confirmation. Hargrove swallowed, his mouth suddenly dry. "Yes, sir," he managed, the word "sir" sounding foreign on his tongue now. The man stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "You are being placed under federal investigation effective immediately," he said, each word delivered with calm precision. "You will remove your weapon, step back from the scene, and comply." The authority in his voice left no room for interpretation. Hargrove's hands hovered near his belt, uncertain, as if his body had forgotten how to move. I was just doing my job," he said, the sentence unraveling even as he spoke it. Behind him, one of the suited agents stepped forward, extending a hand. Your firearm, he repeated, his tone firm. Hargrove hesitated, his eyes darting briefly toward Angela, as if searching for something, anything that might undo what was happening. She said nothing. She simply watched. That silence sealed it. Slowly, his fingers moved, unclipping the holster, handing over the weapon that had once defined his authority. The agent took it without ceremony. Another stepped in, producing a set of cuffs, not with spectacle, but with quiet inevitability. Turn around, he instructed. The same words Hargrove had used minutes earlier now returned to him, stripped of arrogance, carrying only consequence. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him completely. He turned. The cuffs closed around his wrists, firm, controlled, undeniable. Across the street, the phones remained raised, capturing every second of the reversal. The man with the hose stood frozen, water still pooling around his shoes, forgotten. The curtain in the window remained open, no longer hiding anything. Angela stepped away from the patrol car, her posture straight, her expression calm. One of the agents moved slightly to shield her from the growing attention, but she did not retreat. She did not need to. Hargrove was guided toward one of the SUVs, his steps unsteady, his head lowered, the weight of what had just happened settling fully onto him. The same street he had controlled moments ago now bore witness to his complete unraveling. And as the door closed behind him, the final sound echoed with a quiet finality that no siren could match. Justice had not raised its voice. It had simply arrived. The door of the black SUV closed with a muted thud, sealing Officer Daniel Hargrove inside as the vehicle idled for only a moment before pulling away with quiet authority. The second SUV followed close behind, their presence fading down the street as swiftly and precisely as they had arrived. And just like that, the noise, the tension, the suffocating weight that had settled over Maplewood Drive began to lift. The flashing lights were gone. The shouting had ended. What remained was a silence that felt different now, not heavy, but restored. Angela Brooks stood beside her car, her posture unchanged, her breathing steady, as if the storm that had just passed had never shaken her at all. One of the agents lingered for a moment, offering a respectful nod. Ma'am, if you need anything further, we will follow up directly, he said. Angela returned the nod, her voice calm, grounded. Thank you. That will be all. There was no triumph in her tone, no need for it. The outcome spoke for itself. The agent stepped back, then turned, rejoining the quiet departure of authority that no longer needed to announce itself. Across the street, the man with the hose slowly turned the water off, the steady stream finally ceasing as he looked down at the puddle at his feet, as if only now realizing how long he had been standing there. He glanced back toward Angela, his expression no longer uncertain, but respectful, almost reverent. A woman on the porch lowered her phone, her shoulders relaxing, her face softening as the tension drained away. The curtain in the window gently closed, not out of fear this time, but because there was nothing left to hide from. Angela turned back toward her car, reaching for the door handle with the same measured movement she had used at the start of the evening. She paused briefly, her hand resting against the metal, the fading warmth of the engine beneath her palm. For a moment, the world felt still again. Not the fragile stillness from before, but something steadier, something earned. She opened the door and slid into the driver's seat, placing her phone gently in the center console. The jazz station was still playing, the soft melody resuming as if it had simply been waiting for her return. She adjusted the mirror slightly, her reflection staring back at her, composed, unbroken. No visible trace of what had just occurred, except perhaps in her eyes, where something deeper now settled into place. Outside, the neighborhood slowly returned to motion. A car passed by at a normal pace. A distant lawn mower started again, its steady hum blending into the background. Life, as it always did, continued. Angela started the engine, her hands resting on the wheel, fingers relaxed once more. She took one slow breath, then guided the car back onto the road, merging seamlessly into the quiet rhythm of the street. No rus, no hosetaschen, just forward. Behind her, the space where chaos had unfolded now looked like any other stretch of suburban pavement, empty, ordinary, almost forgettable. But for those who had witnessed it, the memory would remain, not of fear, but of something else entirely. A reminder that true authority does not need to shout, and that justice, when it arrives, does not always come with noise. Sometimes it simply stands its ground, waits, and lets the truth speak for itself.